Moon of the Spider, Chapter 2. The Inn of the Black Ram was a flat-roofed stone building in the lower end of Westmarch, the city that saw its fair share of the suspicious and the unsavory. Paradoxically, that meant that the establishment also saw its fair share of the powerful and wealthy, both those who sought the dank environment to close questionable deals and those who simply desired a thrill. There were some of each this particular evening. The various types seated at their booths and tables and murmured over tankards of throat-scorching ale or half-burnt mutton. But, whatever their reason for choosing the Black Ram this foggy eve, all without exception felt themselves turning for no reason that they understood towards its creaking door just as the great bell of the city struck the late hour. He was pale of skin and had a narrow face, better suited for a studious clerk than a mysterious figure shrouded in dark cloak and robes. His eyes were his most arresting feature, for they were distinctly curved and of a startling grey. From out under the hood of his cloak, a few strands of flat black hair hung over his forehead. The stranger was of a slim build, but in that way that acrobats were. The newcomer's high leather boots made no sound on the aged planks as he strode toward an open booth. His cloak billowed as he walked, and in the flickering light of the boxy brass oil lamps above, tiny silver symbols sewn into the trim of the garments glittered, disappeared, then glittered to life again. Under the cloak, several small pouches and one large one hung from the stranger's belt. The large pouch held some round object in it the size of a huge grapefruit. He slid onto one of the benches in the empty booth with the same silent ease as he marked his entrance to the inn. The other occupants of the Black Ram eyed him a moment more, but when he did nothing but sit back in the shadows, most returned to their own dealings and drinks. A few of the more disagreeable souls pretended to do the same, but their gazes constantly shifted back to the pouch and its mysterious contents. And in one corner opposite from the new figure, a young woman whose graceful beauty stood out like a beacon in the neighborhood of the Black Ram watched him most intently. With her sat two men, one a giant with the clear look of a bodyguard, and the other roughly her age and with enough similarity of features to be easily identified as related to the woman. He scowled in the stranger's direction, clearly repulsed by what he saw. The well-endowed, blonde-serving woman, who should have seen to the hooded figure's needs, refused to step from behind the waist-high wooden counter where ales were poured from the barrels. The proprietor, a balding stout man of middle age, tugged on his thick lower lip, then wiped his hands and proceeded out himself. Hands clutching his faded apron, he approached the booth. Under a heavy brow, he eyed his newest patron with far more respect than he generally gave to all but the most neighbor. Greetings, master. Hiram I am, master of the Black Ram. 'Tis an unusual honor it 'tis to have one of yours here. Unusual, but not unheard of. Been one or two over the years. The seated figure nodded once. His voice was smooth, calm. Yes, I would not imagine many have come to Westmarch. What can I bring you? This too I smell will do. I would ask for water, but here I suspect I would be healthier to drink the ale. Hiram grunted. Aye. Then that is all. Unless you also have a room for the night. The innkeeper swallowed. Just one night? Yes. Sensing Hiram's hesitation, the figure reached a gloved hand to one of the pouches at his waist. As he brought it up, it clinked with the song of good coin. Much of the innkeeper's trepidation vanished. Aye, for one night we can help you, Master Zale. Just Zale. His grey eyes shifted away from Hiram. "I'll be getting your meal and drinking immediately, Master Zale," Hiram declared, ignoring the other's last statement. To the proprietor, anyone who has the money to pay well was deserved of a title, even one such as this. Left alone again, Zale surreptitiously surveyed the room. He had never been this far from home, and, despite his demeanor, was uneasy. It had not been his intention to leave the jungles of Kyrgyzstan for the western kingdoms, but he had been drawn here by forces far stronger than himself. Would that I could be like them, he thought, blightedly ignorant of the troubles converging on us all. His journey had taken him to the kingdom of Westmarch and the capital city of the same name. Cautious questioning of locals, cautious because of his calling ever risked the notice of the authorities, had garnered Zale only hearsay, enough to keep him enticed, but not enough to explain to him why he had felt driven to come to this particular region. He noted the woman across the room still eyeing him whenever she thought him unaware. From the glances and the murmurs that passed between her and the smaller male, a sibling, Zale suspected, they knew him for what he was, a follower of Rathma, a devotee to the maintaining of the balance, a delver into the world of the dead. Many shunned necromancers, not without good reason sometimes, but those like Zale who had given themselves over to the teachings of Rathma meant people no harm. Zale's kind fought against the darkness, against the prime evils, for victory by the forces of hell would forever send the balance completely awry. The Rathmians' methods might not always meet with the approval of the uninitiated masses, but the results were what counted. One terrible defeat could mean the end of all. Each necromancer was taught to follow the course of the ongoing struggle on his own, choosing his path on the basis of where his senses dictated he had to go. It had come as a great shock to Zale when he had felt himself compelled to journey west across the Twin Seas, but he had not shirked from his duty. The balance was in too precious a state to turn a blind eye from what needed to be done. After all, the World Stone had been destroyed. His dark reverie was interrupted by the return of Hiram with his meal. The stew, a greenish-brown mass with bits of old vegetables and stingy meat in it, had a tolerable odor and taste, and the ale looked fresh enough. Having expected worse, Zale nodded his approval. He was nearly hungry enough to devour the table, though he would have never visibly revealed such weakness even to himself. Rathmians learned to fast for extended periods of time in order to purge their bodies of impurities, but Zale had gone longer than normal. Even this questionable fare would go far in restoring him to his full faculties. Paying the proprietor, the necromancer took off his left glove, picked up the iron spoon resting in the bowl, and began to eat. The right hand remained gloved even despite the growing warmth of the room. As he reached for his drink, a muffled sound emanated from the large pouch. Zale's gloved hand immediately slipped to the pouch, slapping it once. The sound cut off. Out of the corner of his eye, he looked to see if anyone had noticed. Only the woman appeared to have noticed anything unusual, but instead of being disturbed by it, she was now speaking more animatedly with the young male. He in turn shrugged and said something clearly derogatory about Zale. The necromancer turned his attention back to his meal and his thoughts. In truth, he could actually not be certain that the World Stone had been destroyed, but the evidence was certainly there. Mount Ariyat, where legends claimed it had been hidden, had exploded, its entire top ravaged. The destruction had been heard about, even here in faraway Westmarch. More to the point, the rumors among those with the site gave starker credence to the horrific claim. It was said that one of the prime evils themselves, Baal, Lord of Destruction, had been the cause, and if so, the mortal plane was in for far worse to come. The World Stone had existed since time immemorable, created, so the teachings of Rathma said, to keep the mortal world protected. Now, both the powers of light and darkness reached out to fully claim humanity, and in their battles against one another, the two cosmic factions threatened to destroy what they desired. Somehow, all that tied into Zale's own urge to come to Westmarch. Somewhere in this vast kingdom, the repercussions of Bale's heinous deed would soon be felt. The only trouble was, he had no idea what to do next. Arriving in Westmarch was as far as his senses of urgency had brought him. Now, Zale felt adrift, confused. If you cannot find the way, wait, and the way will find you. Rathma himself had supposedly said that, and from past experience Zale had found it to be all too true a statement. Yet, despite his extensive training, he was finally growing impatient. If the balance, and therefore all else, was in jeopardy, it behooved the way to find him, quickly. He smelled before he saw the man suddenly standing beside his booth. The whiskered and capped figure looked as if he had been to sea much of his life, and, from the scars and missing finger, a good part of that had probably been as a privateer. The mariner leaned over the table, obscuring Zale's view of all else, and looked the Rathmian up and down. "A friend of mine. He says that you be a necromancer." "He is correct," Zale quickly returned, hoping that would end the conversation there and then. Alas, such was not to be. Bending so near that his breath came at the spellcaster in smothering waves, the Westerner continued, "So these marks on your cloak." He seized the portion near Zale's shoulder and pulled it up between them. Seen close, the symbols almost danced. "They're all about death, then. They are about aspects of the mortality of life and that which follows after. Death, among other things." The necromancer had no wish to draw more attention to himself, but he could see this conversation coming to no good end. What intention did the man have? "Get your grubby fingers out of my eye!" bellowed a voice all too familiar to him. From somewhere behind Zale there was a gasp and a curse. They were followed by a thud, and the same voice shouted, "Damn! I can't stop myself! Zale! Zale, lad!" The man who had been speaking with the necromancer suddenly grabbed for Zale's throat. Zale moved faster. The heel of his left hand barreled into the villain's jaw, throwing the latter back. At the same time, the necromancer muttered a few words under his breath. The scarred mariner looked around the room in absolute panic. He pointed at an empty corner and gibbered, "By the twin seas! What is that beast?" His gaze shifted left. "Another! Demons! There are demons everywhere!" Screaming, he shoved past his partner in crime, a stocky, bearded figure holding a dagger in one hand. The second mariner's other hand was still half clenched. Zale quickly looked down at his waist. While he had been distracted by the first man, the companion had cut free the large pouch without his sensing it. Of course, that had been the worst mistake that they could have made. The second thief belatedly noticed Zale rising. He started to lunge, but the spellcaster muttered another word. The blade went completely past Zale. His attacker stumbled, then gasped. He began frantically waving both hands about. "My eyes! I can't see! My eyes!" The effect was a temporary one, just like the spell that had made the first brigand think that he was surrounded by demonic creatures. Zale started to reach for the blinded villain. "Look out!" called a female voice. He ducked back just in time to avoid the curved edge of a sword across his midsection. A weary figure, who was clearly in league with the pair, grinned as he slashed again at Zale. The necromancer reached to his waist and removed a small dagger. His adversary laughed, for although the spellcaster's dagger was a curious one, being serpentine of shape in the blade and carved from what appeared ivory, it hardly matched the length of the villain's sword. But when the cutthroat attempted to get past Zale's guard, The dagger was there, meeting the longer blade and deflecting it with ease. Twice more the attacker lunged, only to be foiled. Zale then pressed. He easily came under the other's guard, his dagger cutting the brigand in the arm and the chest. The necromancer's foe began to retreat, only to stumble over the purloined pouch. "Watch where you step in," complained a voice that seemed to come from within it. The would-be thief collided with the floor. In desperation, he flung his sword at Zale, then leaped away. He seized the arm of his still blind comrade, then both men fled through the door. Zale had no intention of giving chase. He thrust the dagger into his belt, then quickly retrieved the pouch. An epithet started to escape it, but a quick tap by the necromancer brought silence. Of the other patrons, most had fled at some point in the struggle. The few who remained seated eyed him for the most part with trepidation, loathing, and not a little fear. Zale found it of interest that the woman and her bodyguard were standing as if having been prepared to give assistance. They were, in fact, the only ones who did not now treat him as a pariah. The Rathmien recalled the warning cry and knew that it had been the noblewoman who had given it. He bowed his head slightly in her direction, noting how she appraised him even now. Turning back to the booth, Zale found Hiram anxiously coming over to him. The necromancer easily read the innkeeper's expression, for it was one that he had seen far too often. "I will be leaving," Zale informed his host before Hiram could get up the nerve to ask him to do so. "I will not be needing the room either." The proprietor could not hide his relief. "'Tis not me, master, but the others. They don't understand." Shrugging off Hiram's attempt at explanation, the black-clad figure retrieved his one glove from the table. Putting it back on, he tossed some coins to the innkeeper. "This will suffice, I think." The stout man eyed what lay in his palm. "More than enough, master. I can't in good faith—" "Do not trouble yourself." Zale was not wealthy, not at all, but as this had been his first stop in the capital, he wanted to leave with some semblance of respect from the locals even after such chaos. A lost cause, surely, but he felt that he had to try. With the same silent stride with which he had entered, the necromancer headed out of the Black Ram. Zale had no notion as to where he would spend the night, but if necessary he would do so out in the wild. He was used to doing so in the jungles of Kyrgyzstan, and so this would not be so different, albeit colder. His training had taught him to ignore most differences in temperature, and, fortunately, the weather here was not that chilly anyway. The mist had thickened since his entrance. Zale focused, trying to see with more than simply his eyes. "Damn thugs!" grumbled a voice at his side. "Be quiet, Humbert. You weren't the one rolling helplessly on the floor, and that without so much as a single drink beforehand." Zale tapped the pouch. "No, I had only a sword against which to contend." "And you're welcome for my help there, lad. What would you do without me?" The pale figure permitted himself a brief smile, but otherwise did not answer. Then he sensed another presence near him. In a whisper, he commanded, "Silence! Are you just—" But another tap by the necromancer on the pouch finally quieted his unseen companion. Reaching out with his heightened senses, Zale located the newcomer behind him. With one hand near the hilt of the dagger, he continued along as if unaware. Heavy thuds signaled the other's approaching steps. Stealth was clearly not a strong suit for the one following him. When he felt that his pursuer had gotten close enough, Zale spun around. In the necromancer's hand, the pale blade stood ready. The shadowed form of a giant met his gaze. Something about it struck Zale as familiar, and when he looked closer, he recognized the man. It was the bodyguard of the noble woman who had given Zale warning. The giant's hair was shorn close. His rounded face reminded the Rathmien of some of the primates inhabiting the jungle trees, even to the flat, wide-nostriled nose. There was nothing foolish about the dark-skinned figure before Zale, however. He stood with the stance of a well-trained fighter, in that manner reminding the necromancer of Captain Cantro Dumont, a mercenary whose path Zale had crossed and whom he respected highly. The bodyguard was clad in dark blue livery with crimson edging on his sleeves and pant legs. An emblem, a red circle surrounding a blue hawk's head, had been sewn on the uniform just where the heart was located, one of those unfortunate traditions that often gave enemies a perfect point upon which to target their weapons. The broad-rimmed boots seemed a bit garish to the Rathmian, but he would not have ever been foolish enough to say so to such a mountain of a man. "I come at the behest of the mistress," rumbled the bodyguard, showing both hands empty. He had an accent that remarked him as coming from near Gulain, on the western edge of the Twin Seas, and a place through which Zale had passed to his way to the western kingdoms. "She would seek your counsel, Rathmian, in a matter of the soul. Would not a Zakharum priest be more appropriate than I?" The giant grinned, and even in the misty dark Zale could see his white teeth, his many white teeth. The Zakharum, they would not appreciate the mistress's intent. The fact that she asked a necromancer to come to her made that clear enough, but Zale was not ready to simply acquiesce. And what would she wish of one of mine? She must speak with her husband, a matter of urgency. And if the woman needed Zale, it was because her husband was dead. An inheritance, no doubt. There were those who thought the Rathmians no better than the charlatans who read fortunes or gave seances at fairs or on the roads. Paid performers, even if some of them had the gift. He started to turn away, but the bodyguard would not have it. The man reached for Zale's arm, unaware of the danger of doing so. "She has nowhere else to turn. She said something drew her to the inn, and when she saw you, she felt certain that you were the reason." The necromancer hesitated. The last was likely a lie, but her suggestion that she had been drawn to the same location as him made Zale think again of Rathmia's words. Was the way being shown to him now? He balanced the pros and cons of agreeing, and found the cons slightly the stronger. Yet, when Zale opened his mouth to speak, it was to answer, "Very well, I will see her." "Thank you." The bodyguard's tone hinted of tremendous relief, something that the Zale had not expected from a hired fighter for an employer. Most would have simply accepted the response. Zale read in this man a deep loyalty. His large companion led the necromancer through the mist-enshrouded streets. Despite his agreement to see the noblewoman, Zale remained cautious. This could still be a trap set by the thieves or even the Zakharum. But if a trap, it appeared an elaborate one. Some blocks from the Black Ram, Zale and his still unnamed companion confronted an elegant coach pulled by 4 muscular white horses. A dour driver in the same livery as the bodyguard nodded to the giant. Zale noted that the house insignia was not at all obscure, a contrast to the age-long practice of aristocrats out on such ventures. The noblewoman was either very open about her deeds or very naive. The bodyguard moved ahead to open the door of the coach. As he did, someone within leaned toward the opening. Zale faltered slightly. Her skin was a shade darker than his own, her full lips a deep, rich coloring that he knew was not the result of any enhancements. The hair cascaded down past her shoulders, ending above her bosom. He had no doubt that her face and form attracted many a man, but she was clearly one who did not in any manner use her gifts for influence or gain. Certainly not with a foul necromancer, especially. The noblewoman eyed Zale closely, then glanced at her underling. "Thank you, Polth." The giant bowed. "Mistress." She extended a slim hand toward the Rathmian. "Please, enter." "I would first know a name, my lady, a true name." Before she could answer, A male voice within the coach snarled, "By the stars, Celine! I told you this was going too far. Tell him nothing and let's be gone from this stinking area. I have known much better places to get drunk in than that flea trap we just left." Zale recalled the man in the black ram that he had assumed was her brother. So far there seemed little similarity in their personality. That he had already given away her first name while insisting she tell him nothing said much. "Hush, Sardik," she returned quietly, smiling at Zale as if well aware of what he thought of her brash companion. "What he asks is fair if he's to assist me. You can't trust his kind. The Church of Zakharum says he's a desecrator of graves, a ghoul." Celine's smile hardened, and the gaze she turned on to the unseen Sardak immediately silenced him. When she looked again at Zale, it was with honest apology. "My brother is protective of me, Rathmien, as I am of him, Master." She no doubt had to be more protective of the impetuous Sardak than he of her, but Zale did not say so. He nodded, then drew closer. "I am just Zale, my lady." "Nothing more?" "Among my calling we most often forego any other name, for we are just servants of the balance, with ties to no house or clan." "Well, just Zale, I am the Lady Celine Nesardo, and if that is enough introduction, I prefer that we leave here now. What I wish to speak to you about is better done elsewhere." She returned into the coach, her invitation for him to sit beside her obvious. Zale's brow arched. Few women there were who would have willingly offered that, even for the summoning of a rich husband's spirit. He had expected her to insist he sit next to the charming Sardak. A muffled snort escaped the pouch. Poth frowned, but when the noise did not repeat itself, he relaxed again. Still holding the door, he said, "Master Zale?" Bowing his head slightly to the bodyguard, Zale slipped up into the coach with the quiet ease of a shadow. Celine emitted a small gasp at his grace and swiftness, and from the other seat Sardak mumbled a curse. His vision more tuned to the night than that of most people, Zale saw the sour expression of the brother's face. However, despite Sardak's threatening attitude, Zale calculated that the man was little danger to him. Drink was Sardak's only weapon, which he used against himself. In that brief moment during which her brother had captured the necromancer's attention, Lady Nazardo had fully recovered her wits. She glanced at the large pouch. "The coach is small. I can have Poth put that in the storage box in the back, if you like. You might be more comfortable then." Quickly sliding a hand atop the bag, Zale replied, "It stays with me." She had obviously seen the movement of his hand, but said nothing of it. "Yes, I saw how these thieves learned that lesson, to their dismay." Lady Nesardo said no more about the pouch, not even evidencing any curiosity as to what it held. That despite having no doubt heard the voice in the inn, she would find out soon enough the truth if Zale agreed to what she requested. Sardak remained grimly silent throughout the ride, staring at the necromancer as if Zale had grown fangs and a pair of horns. Zale had expected his hostess to begin explaining her needs, but when she spoke, it was only to ask him such mundane questions like how his journey across the Twin Seas had gone and what Lutgulain was like. Celine did not ask why he had traveled so far, though. The noblewoman did her utmost to treat him with the respect due another of her station, as one who was generally looked upon with disdain, distrust, or fear, all feelings embodied in her brother at the moment. Zale found it refreshing. Then, without warning, a black wave washed over him, overwhelming his senses. It was too much even for his training. A gasp escaped Zale's lips, and the cloaked figure suddenly sprawled against the back of the seat. The interior of the coach vanished. The necromancer was caught in a bottomless black vortex. He felt bony fingers clawing at his flesh and heard the wailing of thousands of lost souls. The fingers tore relentlessly at him, resurrecting another horrible time that made the Rathmian's gloved right hand clench tight. Suddenly, Zale became trapped in a sticky substance that he could not see. It was everywhere, and even his slightest struggles entangled him further. The wailing grew more strident. He heard the sounds of battle and the cries of death. Magical forces sprung into play around him. And then something else approached. It reached out from beyond death, from a place far worse. Even though it was so very distant, he could sense its awful malevolence. But at that very moment another presence entered his struggling thoughts. Who or what it was, Zale could not say, only that it sought to drag him forth from what assailed him. He seized the lifeline offered and finally managed to focus his will. The necromancer's mind tore free of the sickness trapping it. The clawing hands and the mourning voices receded, and with them the pain. Foiled, the dark presence sank back into the foul place from which it had emerged, and the mortal world began to come into focus again. The first thing that Zale saw was Lady Celine Nesardo's shadowed face looming over him. Her expression was filled only with concern. She had one cool hand against his temple. He realized then that she had been the source of his lifeline. The noble woman had some gift of magic herself. "His eyes are focusing again," she muttered, her other hand thrust toward her brother. "Give me your flask." Celine. "The flask!" A moment later she brought a small silver drinking flask to Zale's lips. The disciplines of the Rathmins did not preclude drink, but still the liquid that slipped down Zale's throat burned like fire. The necromancer coughed violently. Through his struggles he heard Sardak chuckle. "Can handle the dead, but can't handle his liquor." Celine glared at him. "Considering what you pour into your system, be thankful that I am not having to ask him to summon your spirit. At least my spirit would be full of spirits." Zale ignored their argument, clearly an ongoing one of no relevance to the stunning attack on him. He shifted back to a proper sitting position, his face betraying nothing of his thoughts. Calm he might have seemed, but inside the necromancer was still feeling the effects of the earlier strain. It had taken him completely by surprise, catching him with most of his defenses down. From where had it originated? He had sensed nothing upon his arrival in Westmarch, nothing even of the Black Ram. How could such a powerful force be so localized? "Are you better?" asked Celine. "I am well." "What happened to you?" Instead of answering, Zale eyed her and asked, "There is more to this than simply speaking with the shade of a loved one, is there not?" The coach came to an abrupt halt. The Lady Nesardo quickly glanced out of the window. "We're here," the noble woman declared, utterly ignoring Zale's question. "Home sweet home," added Sardak with some mockery. Polth appeared at his mistress's door. He swung it open, then gave the Lady Nesardo a hand down. Sardak, moving with astonishing grace for one in his inebriated condition, slipped out right after her without so much as a glance back at the necromancer. From without the coach, Celine commanded, "Help your friend, Polth." He did not have a pleasant ride. Without batting an eye, the bodyguard held his huge hand out to the Rathmian. "Master Zale? Thank you, but I'm recovered enough." Keeping the pouch near his side, he stepped out. While he had been recouping his strength, the coach had apparently not only arrived at the gates of its destination, but had entered them. A huge brick wall with spikes atop surrounded a wide manicured lawn. Zale saw the vehicle had driven up a stone path that wound from the iron gates to the front steps. "Welcome to our humble abbot," jested Celine's brother, stretching his arm toward the house. Zale looked up, and up further yet. In the midst of so many tall, arched buildings with jutting towers and gargoyles atop the battlements, the house of Nesardo stood unique. It loomed higher than any of its neighbors, but where their towers ended in tiled, weathered points, it did so with a pale, moon-like roundness that seemed so pristine that Zale first thought it a new addition. But a cursory study of the structure as a whole immediately put that notion to rest. There were no breaks between the sections, as was always evident with even the most intricate reconstruction. This was the house as it had originally been designed. Zale's gaze moved on. From the peculiar rounded roof, the sleek walls of the tower descended to a more typical rectangular design, which stretched out nearly twice as wide as the next largest domicile. The roof of the main section arced so sharply and narrowly that it gave Celine's residence the feel of a cathedral or a church, a complete contrast to the top of the tower. There were 8 windows on each level, and each of those windows was shaped like an octagon. 8 fluted columns also stood guard at the entrance, which consisted of a pair of massive iron doors, each with 8 bracketed frames decorating the front. To reach the doors, visitors would first have to ascend an equal number of lengthy marble steps wide enough to hold several dozen people at once. At most any other time, such an obsession with a particular number would have struck Zale with much interest, for the teachings of Rathma included understanding the influence of all numbers on the balance. There were numbers whose use could tilt it one way or another with ease, if manipulated by the knowing soul. But, for the moment, Zale did not pay that any mind, for he was struck instead by something more immediate, something more unsettling. The building before him housed not only the Nesarda family, but also the source of that which had nearly taken him in the coach.